I guess I never truly lived until I turned 64. It hit me like a revelation. What had held me back all these years? What joys and experiences had I deprived myself of? These questions stirred something deep inside me, a mix of regret and a newfound sense of awakening. My husband, David, had passed away 12 years ago, leaving a void that never fully healed. That morning felt like any other, but something shifted. I decided to finally tackle the one thing I'd been avoiding for years, cleaning out the basement. The basement had become a chaotic storage space, filled with dusty boxes and forgotten relics of my life. As I opened the first box, I came across an old photo album. It stopped me in my tracks. Flipping through its pages, I found a picture from my younger days. A beach party, to be precise. In the photo, I was holding a margarita, laughing with abandon, wearing a bright orange bikini. I looked so carefree and radiant, as though the world had no weight. That young Elizabeth, so full of life, felt like a stranger and yet so familiar. Before I could sink too deeply into memory, I heard a sound at the basement door. I turned and saw Bruce, my step-grandson. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. "Surprise," he said, lifting a coffee cup in greeting. "Bruce, when did you get here?" I asked, surprised but genuinely happy to see him. "Just now," he replied, descending the stairs. "Your car's outside, so I figured I'd drop by. Looks like you could use some help." Before I could protest, Bruce had joined me. His eyes landed on the album in my hands. "What's this?" he asked, leaning in. I hesitated, but he had already taken the photo from the page. He studied it carefully. "This is you?" he asked, his expression a mix of amazement and curiosity. "Yeah," I said, laughing nervously. Back in my wild days. Bruce looked at the photo, then back at me. His gaze carried something unspoken. Admiration, perhaps? "Wow," he said softly. "It's hard to imagine you like this, but it's kind of amazing." I wasn't sure how to feel. His words stirred emotions I'd buried long ago. Memories of freedom, joy, and even desires I hadn't felt in years came flooding back. "All right, enough reminiscing," I said, trying to shake off the feeling. I closed the album. "We need to start hauling these boxes out of here." But Bruce gently stopped me. "Wait, let's look through this some more," he said, half joking but clearly fascinated. "It's incredible to see you like this, so young, vibrant, and different." I hesitated. The album contained more than just carefree beach photos. There were snapshots of my wilder days, moments that I hadn't revisited in decades. But seeing Bruce's genuine interest, I couldn't refuse. "All right," I said, smiling faintly. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Some of these photos might be a bit much." Bruce chuckled. "I'm sure they're all great," he said, sitting beside me with the album in his lap. As we turned the pages together, the photos unfolded stories of my life. Beach parties, late nights in college, and youthful adventures I'd long forgotten. The warmth of his presence and the flicker of admiration in his eyes brought those moments back to life in a way I hadn't expected. One photo caught my eye. Me, dancing in a tight, backless red dress, tipsily enjoying the moment. Bruce lingered on that one a little too long, staring at it with a mixture of fascination and surprise. "This is really you?" he asked, his gaze moving from the photo to me. His face lit up with awe and curiosity. "Yeah," I replied, a little shy. "It was just youth, you know. Things were different back then." Bruce paused, taking in the scene before him. Then, with a soft, genuine smile, he said, "You're incredible." There was a brief silence before he added, "All this time, I've only ever thought of you as my grandmother. But you were, well, like a total party girl." His words made me blush. But they also stirred something inside me. I remembered how David had never shown me that kind of admiration, even when I was younger. He had always been distant, cold, and strict. But Bruce, he was different. The way he looked at me spoke more than words ever could. As we continued flipping through the album, the photos became bolder. One showed me laughing with friends, wearing a short pair of shorts and a bikini top. Another captured me dancing in a nightclub, wearing a plunging black dress. Bruce smiled softly. "It's a privilege to see these," he said. "Even when you were younger, your beauty was breathtaking." David was one lucky man. His words warmed me. But there was something else, a strange feeling growing inside me. The more I felt Bruce's attention, his genuine interest, the more I realized there was a pull between us. He was the kind of man I had dreamed of when I was younger, confident, openly admiring, and eager to discover the parts of me I had kept hidden. When we reached the last page of the album, Bruce closed it but didn't look away from me. "Elizabeth," he said in a low voice, "you're truly extraordinary." His words surprised me. They moved me deeply. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that or spoken to me like that. As our eyes met, the air between us seemed to thicken, as if something was shifting. Despite the cold, dusty basement, a warmth began to rise within me. Bruce's presence made me feel young again. But at the same time, I had no idea where these feelings would lead. When Bruce turned to face me again, there was still that deep admiration in his eyes. "Elizabeth," he said, his voice low but sincere, "after seeing all those pictures, I have to say this. You haven't aged a day. You still look young and absolutely beautiful." The compliment took me by surprise. Even when I was younger, I hadn't often heard such words, especially not from David. My heart raced a little faster, and I felt a blush creeping up my cheeks. "Thank you, Bruce," I said, my voice soft. "But there's no denying that I've aged." I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "Still," I continued, "maybe I've gotten older, but I haven't lost touch with my desires. I've never let go of them." Bruce smiled, his green eyes fixed on mine. "I can feel that," he said. "You're not just beautiful. You're absolutely captivating." For a moment, my gaze wandered over his broad, athletic frame. His tall stature, wide shoulders, and slightly curled blonde hair made him seem like a movie star. But it was the confident yet gentle expression in his eyes that stood out most to me. "It's interesting hearing something like that from you," I said with a faint smile. "David was nothing like you. He was always calm, distant. He never did anything to surprise or excite me. He was a good man, but—" Bruce tilted his head, listening closely. "But not the kind of man you desired, right?" I thought about looking away, but I couldn't. "Yeah," I said, honesty slipping out. "David was never as exciting or passionate as I wished he could be. I'm not saying he was a bad man, but I always felt like something was missing." Bruce was quiet for a moment. Then, with a gentle yet confident smile, he spoke again. "Maybe it's important you realize that," he said softly. "Maybe now's the time to figure out what fills that void." His words sparked something inside me. The way this young man was showing interest, understanding me, and speaking so confidently stirred a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. In that moment, I realized that Bruce wasn't just different from David. He was also the kind of man I had dreamed about in my youth. I didn't know where these feelings would lead or if they were even the right path to follow. After a brief pause, Bruce stood up, slipping his hands into his pockets. His green eyes met mine again. "I'm going to put the bike in the garage and come right back," he said with a calm voice. "But don't stay in the basement. Elizabeth, wait for me in the living room." The confidence in his tone, the way he took control, had an unexpected effect on me. I nodded slightly, agreeing. "All right, Bruce," I said softly. Bruce quickly walked upstairs, and as I watched him go, my thoughts wandered. Even his love for his motorcycle stirred something in me. I imagined him working on it or riding it, energetic, passionate, determined. He was everything I had dreamed about in a man when I was younger. He's so much like the person I always imagined, I murmured to myself. But he's my step-grandson. And yet right now, I couldn't deny how deeply he was affecting me. I moved into the living room and waited. It wasn't long before Bruce returned, holding a bottle of wine. As soon as my eyes fell on the label, I recognized it immediately. Rose, my favorite wine. I had no idea how he knew or why he thought of it, but once again, I felt that spark inside me. I got this from the best place I could find, he said with a slight smile. I hope you like it. Like it? I said, surprised. Bruce, this is my favorite wine. How did you know? He shrugged, his expression suggesting he didn't want to explain. I notice little things when I'm younger, he said. I guess I remembered right. I paused for a moment, moved by how much this young man had remembered about me. Bruce, I said softly, this wine is really special. And so thoughtful. Thank you. He opened the bottle, poured it into 2 glasses, and handed me one. Let's share some good memories tonight, Elizabeth, he said. I raised my glass and we toasted. As I took my first sip, the delicate taste of the rose danced on my tongue. I couldn't help but keep my eyes on Bruce. The more we talked, the more I was drawn to him, not just for how he looked, but for the way he thought and carried himself. When our glasses were nearly empty, Bruce's gaze locked onto mine once again. There was a warmth in his eyes, a pull I couldn't ignore. Inside, I felt something shift, an exciting yet fearful sensation. I still had no idea where these feelings were leading me. Suddenly, Bruce paused. He set his glass down on the table and turned to face me. This time, his expression was more determined, more intense. Elizabeth, he said, his voice low but full of emotion, I have to tell you something. I looked at him, realizing my breathing had quickened. My heart pounded in my chest. Yes, Bruce? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Bruce reached for my hand, his fingers brushing gently over my delicate skin, sending a wave of emotion through me. I know I shouldn't say this, but... He paused, searching my eyes. When I look at you, I just can't stop myself. You're not just incredibly beautiful. You're so much more than I ever imagined. His words rang deep within me, and I felt my face flush. Bruce, I started, but before I could finish, he leaned in, closing the distance between us. In that moment, my heart raced as if it might stop. Watching him come closer, I knew I should stop him, tell him no, but I couldn't fight the powerful pull I felt toward him. When his lips touched mine, slow and deliberate, the world seemed to pause. That kiss was gentle, but also deep, as though everything that had been building inside me suddenly found its release. I felt desires I'd suppressed for years suddenly flood back as Bruce's strong hands moved to my waist. I let myself fully surrender to the moment. When Bruce's lips pulled away from mine, I could feel the tension between us lingering in the air. My heart was still racing, and I looked at him, hoping my eyes could express the depth of what I was feeling. But putting these emotions into words seemed impossible. Driven by an impulse I couldn't ignore, I leaned in and kissed him again. This time, it was me making the move, and as my lips pressed against his once more, something inside me came alive again. Bruce seemed surprised at first, but quickly responded. Our kiss deepened, becoming more passionate. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer with a gentle yet firm touch. I could feel his warmth radiating through me as we lay side by side on the couch, barely any space left between us. His presence, his breath, everything about him filled the moment completely. Resting against Bruce's chest, a restless feeling began to stir inside me. My heart was still racing, but this time it wasn't fear or hesitation. It was a burning desire to let go completely. I slowly sat up, feeling his curious yet calm gaze on me. His eyes were so focused and intense, as though he understood everything happening inside me without a single word. I stood up and hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. Boldness took over, and my hands moved to the thin straps of my dress, which had started to feel like chains holding me back. Bruce didn't say a word. He just watched me, and somehow that gave me the courage I needed. He supported me, not with his hands, but with his eyes. When my fingers grasped the straps and slowly slid them down, the dress slipped off my shoulders, falling gently to the floor. The fabric pulled around my bare feet like a soft puddle. In that moment, I could finally breathe. It wasn't just a physical act. It felt symbolic, like shedding years of restraint and finally freeing myself. When I turned my gaze back to Bruce, the admiration and awe in his expression were unmistakable. He didn't have to say a thing. He understood that this was me breaking through my own limits, fully accepting myself. Bruce slowly stood up and reached out his hand toward me. His touch was tender and strong, but this time, I wasn't just embracing him. I was embracing all of myself. For a full 15 minutes, I stayed in that exact position on the couch, barely moving. I was so close to passing out, but somehow I managed to hold on. Maybe it was the years of longing that had built up, creating a strange resilience in me. Bruce's broad, powerful frame had always drawn me in, but now, the intensity of my attraction was on another level entirely. I was left breathless, as if I had just left the entire world behind. My heart was racing, my body trembling, and every inch of me felt the impact of his presence. For the first time in my life, I felt physically exhausted in the most exhilarating way. It wasn't a limit, it was liberation. Even as I was lost in these overwhelming emotions, my mind wandered into a strange reflection. I didn't truly live until now. I thought to myself, David, what did you hold me back from all these years? What did I deny myself for so long? This inner questioning felt like both a quiet rebellion and a long overdue awakening. Bruce, still catching his breath, ran a hand through his hair. Seeing that he was just as affected as I was somehow comforted me. He gave a faint smile, fixing his tousled hair. Then, in a low voice, he said, I'm going to take a shower. In that moment, I felt the sparkle in his eyes, the softness in his voice, and the calm determination behind it all. Just like that, everything became even more real. I watched Bruce walk away, but my mind stayed stuck on what had just happened. The bittersweet joy of discovering myself so late in life.